The war is now in Russia. A massive Ukrainian raid on the main artery of ammunition in Belgorod. Russia has no strength left in Ukraine. Hundreds of tons of ammunition have been destroyed thanks to this operation. The Russian army is at a loss. Putin literally went crazy when he heard about this operation in Belgorod. His policies against the soldiers in the army have made a big echo all over the world for some time now. Ukrainian soldiers have been preparing for a very big operation in the Russian-Ukrainian war. This operation was based on putting the Russian soldiers in a difficult situation instead of engaging in a direct confrontation with them. This difficult situation would lay the foundation for the Ukrainian army to achieve success in many areas, because the Russian soldiers who had fallen on hard times had no strength left to endure on Ukrainian soil. The Russian soldiers who were still forced to attack on orders from the Kremlin, despite many troubles, were put in a defensive position with the stab of the Ukrainian army. Because the Ukrainian army made a very big operation this time, many Russian young people who were taken from Russia within the scope of mobilization continued to fight reluctantly. No one wanted to fight for Putin after this recent serious deterioration of the conditions due to the success of Ukrainian rights. Realizing this reluctance, Ukrainian soldiers began to think about what they could do to get Russia to withdraw from Ukraine. At this point, a very strong intelligence was transmitted to the Ukrainian army. According to the information conveyed to the Ukrainian army, all ammunition and supplies sent to the Ukrainian region were gathered in a place in the Belgorod region. After this meeting, Russian soldiers determined what was needed for the fronts and directed these trucks to different fronts. In other words, the most critical ammunition network of the war in Ukraine was in this region. It took Ukrainian intelligence almost 6 months to get this information. But thanks to this information, Ukrainian soldiers were now in a position to organize a very different attack. And this attack proved to be a big enough attack to be the end of the Russian troops in the Ukrainian territory. The Ukrainian army found out that the gathering in Belgorod takes place approximately once every 3 weeks. Knowing that a ground attack would be quickly repulsed, the Ukrainian army decided to attack from the air or with long-range missiles. Bayraktars mobilized for the Ukrainian army. The Bayraktars, which moved from Ukraine towards Russia, first conducted a very serious reconnaissance in that region. The fact that the area was a valley enabled them to determine that a major bottleneck would be created by the detonation of the front vehicle of the Russian convoy. This information completely changed the Ukrainian operation. If it could keep the Russian army stationary, the Ukrainian army could easily use long-range Patriots and HIMARS. But there was a small problem. It was not known whether Russia had a defense system covering this area. To find out, 2 Barracudas were sent to the area as kamikazes. When the Ukrainian army realized that the area where the convoys were gathered was only a little bit outside, they had already decided what kind of operation they were going to carry out. Ukraine first sent Barracudas towards the area once the coordinates of the area were written down by the HIMARS and the long-range Patriots. It was all up to the Bayraktars. Although the Bayraktars had accomplished great things since they entered the service of the Ukrainian army, they had never done anything as big as this operation. About 23 Barracudas were sent to this area. They flew at a very high altitude, which was invisible to the Russian army scouts, and they flew into this area realizing that a very large convoy was gathering in this area. The Barracudas started bombarding, but the start of this bombardment, Russian soldiers started to scatter towards the surrounding area. The Russian army responded with rocket launchers and managed to shoot down 2 Barracudas. But the Barracudas had bombed so critically that it was no longer possible for the Russian army to get out of this valley. The signal was given to the long-range Patriots and HIMARS. The bombardment began with this bombardment. The Russian convoy was fired upon one after another. Especially the missiles hitting the ammunition trucks started to explode. Everything in that area, one after the other. But the real explosion happened right away after that. This convoy had a very critical importance for Russia. The Russian army was going to take a very big step against Ukraine for this. A large number of explosives were on their way to the Ukrainian territory with this ammunition convoy. The truck was cornered before the delivery, and Russian soldiers tried to take it out of the area, but it was hit by a missile and caused a huge explosion. With this explosion, the Russian convoy was completely blown up. When the Ukrainian Bayraktars continued shelling after this incident, the convoy and many armored vehicles were literally destroyed. But the force of this explosion drove the surrounding units of the Russian army in that direction. Realizing this direction, the Bayraktars began to retreat towards Ukraine. The Russian army arriving in this area hesitated and informed the Kremlin. All the ammunition of all the troops in the Ukrainian sector had been destroyed. It was not yet known what the Russian troops would do because of this destruction. But for the Russian army, which was already having a hard time, this move was recognized as the beginning of a very big problem. The Russian army did not know exactly what to do against Ukraine. Russian soldiers were waiting for ammunition and supplies in their positions, and this disappointment led to a lot of trouble. It is known that the soldiers were in groups within themselves and got into huge arguments with the commanders. It has been known to the whole world for a long time that the ammunition sent was not of very high quality. At the beginning of the war, the Russian army entered Ukraine at a very high speed, and when it was seen that it left at the same speed, a large number of vehicles and ammunition were left behind. While Russia's economy suffered a huge budget deficit due to the destruction of these ammunition and supplies, it was determined that Russia, whose weapon stocks were not enough, gave weapons from the Soviet Union period to these soldiers. The statements made by one of the captured Russian soldiers were of a nature to confuse Russia. The Ukrainian army knew almost everything that Russia had in this case. Ukrainian soldiers who knew all the weaknesses of Russia continued to take steps accordingly, while the statements made by the captured Russian soldiers showed this to the whole world. The Russian soldiers said that Russia had recently sent very old weapons, stating that these old weapons are not only useless in war but also injure and maim many soldiers, even during trainings. The soldier revealed how much Russia values the soldier. This situation brought Russians whose relatives are at war to their feet. The people who thought that no one in the Russian army was worth anything started to revolt against Putin, whom they were angry with because of the economy. These uprisings were further fueled by the rhetoric of Kadyrov put his number one ally. When the Russian people said that a lot of soldiers were being lost and that there were not enough supplies for the soldiers at the front, Kadyrov said that if you continue to protest, I will send you to your relatives. While these statements had a huge repercussion all over the world, they showed the world once again how hard Russia was losing the war. In other words, with this statement, Putin indirectly acknowledged that the war was lost. This shows that there is a very intense acceptance of a loss in Russia. This is a multi-signals that the war will soon end in favor of Ukraine. Ukraine insists there is a strategy behind continuing the fight for Bakhmut. The primary strategic goal is to use the war to weaken the Russian army. Ukraine is using Bakhmut defense to buy time until Ukraine can launch its anticipated spring offensive. Ukraine is also taking this opportunity to kill as many Russian soldiers as possible and deplete its reserves. After all, it takes time to build a backup and launch a counterattack. Not far away, Ukrainian soldiers successfully defend themselves, inflicting the heaviest possible losses on the enemy. President Zelensky estimates that Russia suffered a total of 20,000 to 30,000 casualties in Bakhmut, while Russian forces claimed more than 1,100 deaths in the past few days. Experts are divided over Bakhmut's strategic importance, but the city gained significant political credibility as both sides poured significant resources into the war. Kiev is warning that the fall of the city will open a deeper path for Russian forces deep into Donetsk province, which the Kremlin claimed last year annexed to Russia. Ukrainian soldiers continue to protect their defense lines successfully. The Kraken Regiment, which was established on the same day as Russia's invasion of Ukraine and defended its country by showing outstanding success in conflicts, consists of high-profile volunteer units having successfully liberated many occupied villages during the fighting. The Kraken Regiment dealt a heavy blow to Putin in Bakhmut. Kraken, the special unit of defense intelligence of the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine, destroyed an important observation tower in Russia with a kamikaze drone. Kraken Regiment announced that they successfully destroyed the Grenadier Autonomous Watchtower in Bryansk Oblast, Russia. After Russia announced that saboteurs from Ukraine crossed its territory and attacked border villages, a raid followed in its second year, fueling fears that the ongoing war would escalate after the attack. Details of what happened are still scarce, and conflicting theories still circulate about possible perpetrators and their targets. An unidentified group of Russian nationalists who identify themselves as part of the Ukrainian military claimed responsibility for the attack. Little is known about the group, its membership and, if any, ties to the Ukrainian military. On the other hand, the Special Operations Forces of the Azov Regiment became the 3rd Separate Assault Brigade as part of the ground forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine and is already fighting on the Bakhmut front in the Donetsk Oblast. The Azov Regiment was formed on February 24 during the battle for the capital, providing their combat effectiveness in the territorial defense of Kiev. The Azov Regiment became a unit of the Special Operations Forces. The new brigade and signs are now conquering the hottest fronts. Bakhmut. As a regional defense, fighters defended Kiev and Kiev Oblast, and in the spring the unit was remodeled and helped liberate Kherson and fought in Donetsk Oblast while. Also, Special Operations Forces destroyed the Russians on the Zaporizhia front. The renewed bridgehead noted that their numbers are constantly growing, accepting and training highly motivated fighters into their ranks. The assault bridgehead also symbolizes the presence of the Ukrainian state tradition. As part of the armed forces, the Azov unit continues to develop. Special Operations Forces achieve success by giving their military skill called anger against the enemy and in the fight against the invaders on the way to final victory. The whole world is closely following the Russia-Ukraine war, in which tens of thousands of people lost their lives. This small industrial city of Bakhmut in eastern Ukraine, which has long been the target of Russian troops, is in ruins. There is a serious struggle for the town, which has become a political reputation issue. So why do Russia and Ukraine insist on fiercely waging war around these rubble heaps? Why do both sides put out so many soldiers to attack or protect the city while these problems lurk? Both countries are using their military resources on a large scale to seize the city. A heavy blow came to Putin from the Ukrainian Special Forces in Bakhmut and its surroundings. The new address of the struggle. Clashes continue fiercely in Bakhmut, located in the Donetsk region of Ukraine, while the Ukrainian soldiers continue their tight resistance. The delivery of soldiers to the front line continues. The speed and size of equipment and weapons deliveries to Ukraine from the Allies and their distribution among troop groups has accelerated. On the other hand, Ukraine and Russia reported that they suffered heavy losses as the Bakhmut war intensified. Moscow has been trying to take the eastern Ukrainian city for months in a crushing war of attrition. Casualties are mounting in Bakhmut, which has become a focal point for Russian commanders struggling to deliver any positive news to the Kremlin. The paramilitary organization is at the center of the Russian attack on Bakhmut. Its leader, Yevgeny Prigozhin, risked his own reputation and the reputation of his private army to capture Bakhmut. He hoped to show that his mercenaries could do better than Russian army. He included thousands of prisoners in his army. Many of these people who fought with the Ukrainian defense units died. Yevgeny Prigozhin made it clear that the situation in the city was very difficult. The enemy was fighting for every mistress. Wagner Group fighters are increasingly trapped in urban areas, and that's why it's having a hard time making significant progress. Therefore, it fails. Prigozhin's political influence in Moscow will also weaken. Like Russia, Ukraine gave Bakhmut political prominence and Zelensky made the city an emblem of resistance. Also, when Zelensky visited Washington, he described it as a stronghold of our morale and presented a Bakhmut flag to the U.S. Congress. Ukrainian president and the chiefs of staff have agreed to continue defending Bakhmut, which the country's highest general said it's vital to defense of the entire Eastern Front. Praising the strength and courage of the Ukrainian soldiers, the president of Ukraine stated that the defense of the whole front is the key to stability. In recent years, Washington and Warsaw have invested heavily in the network of facilities used by American forces in Poland. Poland has become the center of American military efforts to contain Russian aggression on NATO's eastern flank. In addition to these harsh and effective measures, Poland continues to take steps to increase the number of its soldiers. Polish President Andrzej Duda has ordered the military to go on high alert amid reports of a military uprising in Russia. Other EU countries have not yet reached the outbreak of a military conflict within Russia. Representatives of EU countries stated that they are monitoring the situation in NATO. Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said that the military bloc was also monitoring the situation. The U.S. Army has deployed its most special weapons and war machines in Poland to the Russian border and the Ukrainian border. There are currently 131,500 NATO forces and 32,500 paramilitary groups in the Polish army, including 120,000 active military personnel and 11,500 U.S. troops. For Russian President Vladimir Putin, the war in Ukraine now means more than keeping NATO's expansion in check. The United States sensed a serious danger to both NATO and itself from Russian aggression and mobilized its troops in Eastern Europe. The US and NATO have recently increased their military presence on the Russian border almost 8 times. A meeting of the alliance's defense ministers over the past few months decided to increase the combat-ready troop from 40,000 to 300,000 and to strengthen air support on the eastern flank. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia, Slovakia, Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Finland are preparing their armies against a possible Russian aggression. Although not as much as Poland, there are around 240,000 active troops in these countries. When 150,000 Polish armies and 90,000 U.S. troops outside these countries are added to this, we see that 480,000 NATO troops are on the alert at the Russian border. In addition, the alliance has a Black Sea border, and part of the Ukrainian war takes place on the Black Sea front. Here, too, the alliance has very serious measures. Turkey is the alliance's Eastern Sea stronghold. For this, the Turkish Army Corps, consisting of 120,000 special forces, has been in high readiness since December 2022. In 2020, NATO decided to strengthen readiness for Article 5 missions with the concept of a new combat cause that provides 5 deployable divisions and 120,000 troops within 20 days for the territorial defense of member states. Headquartered in Istanbul, the NATO Rapidly Deployable Corps, Turkey, NRDC, was approved for this new role in December 2022 and became NATO's designated combat unit for the contingency in 2023. This would technically mean that Turkey would lead NATO's response to any aggression towards the alliance, together with a great army power of Turkey and Poland. NATO is keeping the 600,000 troop emergency response force on alert at the Russian borders. On the other hand, Poland, one of the countries most opposed to this invasion, also showed serious reactions to Russia's Belarusian-backed invasion moves. The strategic location of Poland, which was also supported by the USA, was perfect to support Kiev. Already, Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine has pushed Poland to the forefront of the Second Cold War. This country sided with Ukraine against Russia as a key cog in the NATO alliance, a major contributor to the common defense and a key ally of the United States. Early in the war, Poland served as a temporary headquarters to coordinate the flow of military aid to Ukraine. This operation was shifted to Germany, but Poland remains the key point for the transport of military equipment to Ukraine. NATO member Poland has signed a historic step. The Polish Ministry of Defense recently announced that it's established a military base in a huge area of 60,000 meters squared close to the Kaliningrad border. While HIMARS Patriot and M1 Abrams are deployed to Poland's Russian and Belarusian borders. Poland stores nearly 3,000 NATO military vehicles, tanks, infantry fighting vehicles, artillery, technical security vehicles, and self-propelled bridges will be stored in the center's warehouses. This large military base called LTT-SMC headquarters houses thousands of NATO alliance military equipment and vehicles such as weapons, missiles, armored vehicles, and tanks. In addition, the LTT-SMC Center was built on the model of U.S. bases. The U.S. Embassy in Warsaw stated that a total of approximately 3,000 tanks and armored vehicles will be deployed to the LTT headquarters. Here there will be 7 huge tank depots stationed on Polish territory filled with heavy equipment. Several thousand of the most powerful tanks such as the American M1A2 Abrams CFE3, the German Leopard 2A7, the British Challenger 2 and Poland's K2 Panther are stationed here. In addition, many heavily monitored infantry and combat vehicles such as the American M2A2 Bradley and German Marder will be located here. All of these tanks will belong to the U.S. Armored Brigade Combat Team. This is totally a record. The precautionary deployment of so many NATO war tanks on the borders of Belarus and Kaliningrad shows us that time is still needed to contain Russian aggression in Europe. Russia could pose a threat to Ukraine and Poland from this region with a much lower probability. But it's very difficult to stand against 3,000 tanks and armored vehicles equipped with NATO technologies. In addition to these efforts of NATO and Poland, the Polish Army and the U.S. Army took very serious additional measures. US F-22 and F-35 fighter jets, M1A2 Abrams tanks, HIMARS, and many more powerful combat vehicles have been deployed to strategic points in Poland. In addition, Poland is taking serious measures and closing its borders on Russia's Kaliningrad border and Belarusian border. Polish Interior Minister Mariusz Kaminski announced that Poland has begun to build a state-of-the-art electronic barrier to monitor and counter all kinds of illegal activity on Russia's land border with Kaliningrad territory.